in your business. It's the unique set of rituals and traditions and values and behaviors that make you and different than your nearest competitor. It's your mojo. It's the feel of the place. And it is your number one driver of success. It is your number one competitive advantage.
Welcome to the podcast about communication in business. I'm your host, George Torok. Did you know that I'm known as the speech coach for executives? Because I help business leaders deliver the intended message for greater success. And we do that through one-on-one coaching or training for the team. On this podcast, you will hear insights and advice from communication experts from around the world. My guest today is Michael Kerr. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about Michael. 1, he is a Hall of Fame speaker who speaks on inspiring workplace cultures. 2, he's the author of 9 books, including The Jerk-Free Workplace. Oh, geez, we need one of those. The Humor Advantage and Small Moments, Big Outcomes, How Leaders Create Cultures That Fuel Extraordinary Results. And 3, he lives in beautiful Canmore, Alberta in the Canadian Rockies, where he loves to hike, bike, and cross-country ski. And yes, for those of you old enough to remember, he is a Mike from Canmore. And if that doesn't register, go Google Mike from Canmore. And Mike Kerr, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Hey, thank you, George. It is fabulous to be here again. It's been a while.
Delighted to be talking with you again. And yes, we had a wonderful first interview.
We did.
3 years ago, 2-3 years ago. It has been a while. Hard to believe.
Time has no meaning for me anymore, George. You get to a certain age and the pandemic just kind of threw that out the window. It could have been 20 years ago or 5 years ago. I just don't know.
You're right. I don't even look at that sundial in the backyard anymore. I don't care what the time says. Mike, last time we talked about humor in the workplace. Now we're talking about workplace culture. So let's distinguish. What's the difference between culture and humor? Are they one and the same, or is one a subset of the other?
Well, humor is really a subset. I talk about the role humor plays in workplace culture, how there's a chicken and egg relationship between the two, in fact, how humor can help you build a more positive, collaborative, innovative, creative, surface-focused, inspiring workplace culture. But also, humor is the end result of a positive workplace culture where it becomes easy for everyone to bring a sense of humor along for the ride when they show up at work because you work in such a positive, great place. But workplace culture is really about everything. It's about how you do the things you do in your business. It's the unique set of rituals and traditions and values and behaviors that make you and different than your nearest competitor. It's your mojo. It's the feel of the place. And it is your number one driver of success. It is your number one competitive advantage.
Number one competitive advantage. Okay, so I can imagine a lot of people just suddenly perked up because it could be easy to relegate culture to, well, okay, that's one of those, give it to HR. Let them look after that stuff. You know, that's not really important. We've got a business to run. We've got a profit. We've got customers to satisfy, and we've got to show bottom line. Does culture affect that bottom line?
Oh, yes, in so many ways. I have interviewed hundreds of leaders, George, around the globe. And one of the questions I always ask them, and it's an old question, it's a bit of a cliche question, but I always ask them. So you've got this phenomenally successful company, this great organization. What has been more important in terms of driving your success? Is it your culture or has it been your strategy? And 98% have said, without missing a beat, well, of course you need a good business strategy. Of course. That matters a lot, but it has to be integrated with your culture. And absolutely, the answer to that question is culture has been our driver of success. Culture affects our employee turnover rates, our absenteeism rates, our health and wellness scores, our customer service scores, our productivity. It affects everything. And so many studies show that This is true. I could quote probably hundreds of studies. There's a classic Harvard one that I quote all the time that suggests that how a company focuses on its hiring, its training, and building its culture accounts for anywhere from 30% to 300% growth over its competitors. So there clearly is a bottom line connection to culture. It drives absolutely everything.
What are the indicators? What are the measures of culture?
Well, there's a lot. That's a great question. I mean, some companies measure their culture through employee engagement surveys, and there can be some challenges with that. There are better surveys than others, but I think if you do it right, that is certainly one indicator. I think the real metrics, though, come down to things like employee retention measurements, employee absenteeism rates, your customer service scores, your customer engagement scores, your customer loyalty scores. It's about recognizing things like the difference between a long-term employee and a long-term customer versus a truly loyal and engaged customer and employee. And I think if you can measure those, not always easy to do, but some companies do, that's a really strong indicator, because there is a difference, right, between being a long-term employee and being a truly loyal, engaged employee. And I think, when I talk about how do you folks know that you have a really good culture, a lot of the times, sometimes they laugh, right? And they say, well, we don't really measure it, but we just kind of know. Like, you can feel the energy when you walk into the place. You can hear the laughter. You can just feel the vibe, feel the mojo, right? And as I write in my book, George, nobody's invented a mojo meter yet, but I think we all kind of know what that feels like, what that looks like. In fact, a lot of the clients that call me, they will use that term mojo. They'll say, I think Michael, we've lost our mojo somewhere along the way. We used to have this really great, positive, fun-filled culture, and we've just we've lost our mojo. So we want you to help us get our mojo back.
So if mojo is part of culture, when there's a lack of mojo, does that mean that there's no culture?
Well, everyone has a culture, right? There's always a culture. It's just whether you want a good culture or not, right? Whether you want an inspiring culture, what kind of culture do you want? Because even dysfunctional, toxic workplaces have a culture, and it's the culture that is creating that dysfunction and creating that soul-sucking, fun-sucking work environment. In fact, the reason I speak about what I do is because I worked in this soul-sucking, fun-sucking workplace. And I decided to make it my mission that work should not be sucking the life out of us. Work is way too important in our lives. It goes way beyond a paycheck. It affects our personal lives, our marriages, our family lives. It affects our mental and physical health, where you live, your identity, your growth as a human being. It's a little bit of a time sucker, folks may have noticed. So it has this huge impact on our lives. So I think we owe it to our employees, to our families of our employees, to ourselves, to our souls, to create as positive, as inspiring a workplace culture as possible, because this sucker matters.
And Michael, I can certainly connect with you on having worked in more than one workplace where that was sucking the soul out of me. Yeah, and it's fortunate that I left before there was mass murder.
before your soul was completely drained out of you. So George, let me ask you this, dude, if you could just name one thing or label what it was that was sucking the soul out of you the most, do you know what that is? Do you remember what that was?
There was constant conflict. Yeah. We were in a work environment, high pressure, fast pace, and everyone was constantly defending themselves and therefore attacking each other. Best defense is a great offense. So we're constantly in conflict, blaming other people and not working together. It was... I hear that a lot. And it's fascinating that you should raise that idea of conflict, because that really is, I think, a telling indicator of a healthy culture versus an unhealthy culture. In healthy cultures, there is still conflict, but it's healthy conflict. It's positive conflict. It's constructive conflict where people feel
free to speak up and they feel that psychological safety where they can express their ideas and even get passionate in debates and meetings, which is a good thing if you want to get to the best possible idea. But it's when it becomes unhealthy, that's the issue, right? When it's focused on personalities, on blamestorming, on people not taking responsibility for their own actions, for their own behaviors. And so we have to define the difference between healthy conflict and unhealthy conflict, I think, right? But those really are good indicators when it comes to culture.
Is it fair to blame the leader for the culture or credit the leader for the culture?
Yes and no. In my book, without a doubt, and I say this in my book, that leaders have a disproportionate impact on the culture. Of course they do. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they have the extra responsibility. Leaders influence the culture in profound ways. The way I think of it is in terms of a metaphor, they're kind of like the orchestra conductors, right? They set the tone, they set the mood through their words, through their behaviors, through how approachable they are. Are they able to laugh at themselves and bring a little levity to the workplace? We know from a lot of studies that how leaders lead is really contagious. We infect people with our attitudes. Anxious leaders tend to have anxious, change-resistant teams. So leaders have a disproportionate impact for sure on the culture. I do stress, however, that in great workplaces, everybody has to step up and take responsibility for their culture. Everybody. It can't be outsourced to one department. It can't be offsourced to HR or one individual or just the leader. Everyone has to think about how they're contributing to the culture and remind themselves that everything everyone does or says either adds to their workplace culture or subtracts from it in some way.
Now, that's an interesting factor to keep in mind when we're going through our day and we're trying to decide how to deal with an issue or how to respond to a problem. And I certainly don't recall at any time that when I was faced with an issue or a problem, that I first thought, how is this going to affect our culture?
No, probably not. And I don't think most people do, but I think they should. And I think we should be having those conversations in our teams and starting at the team level, right? Because that's where we have a lot of influence. If you work in a big organization, okay, you might be thinking, well, I can't change my entire organization's culture. Well, no, you probably can't. But you have a lot more influence, I want to suggest, that you might realize when it comes to your piece of the puzzle, your sphere, your team, your department, and recognize that if you have these conversations about what it means to be intentional about your culture, and if everybody is reminded of that, if you open your meeting, say, with a culture moment to talk about the importance of your culture, and remind people of that message that I just said, everything you do either adds or subtracts from your culture, then I think people will start to be a little more intentional. They might just be a little more thoughtful about how they express their ideas, about how they bring up a contentious issue. They might think when they make a decision about how this decision is going to impact the culture, not just the budget, not just an aspect of customer service, but what also is the impact of doing this on our culture.
Does it make sense for a team leader, whether it's a group leader or a team leader, to, on a regular basis, perhaps review what do we believe our culture is and what do we really want it to be? And where's the gap?
Oh, totally. Yeah. You've got to know where you want to go if you want to build a better culture, right? So you've got to constantly be assessing, well, where are we now with our culture and where do we want to be? And you've got to keep those messages alive. I mean, we all know what it's like. Everybody out there has probably worked in those organizations where you have the nice list of values, right? And you put them on the nice poster with the puppies and rainbows and unicorns. And then maybe once a year, if you're lucky, your team gets together and you hold hands and you sing "We Are the World" and talk about your values for 10 minutes. And then that's it, right? Well, of course it doesn't work that way. It can't work that way. You've got to keep those suckers front and center if they mean anything to you at all. So you've got to define what those actually mean. You've got to translate them. You've got to be an interpreter of your values. So what does that actually, so good customer service is one of our values. Well, okay, la-di-da. What does that actually look like? What does that mean in terms of everyone's specific behaviors and attitudes and the words they use? You've got to break it down. You've got to reinforce it. You've got to share examples. You've got to model it. You've got to hold people accountable for living up to your values, and you've got to celebrate success when people are living your values out loud. So it has to be this ongoing story that you are bringing to life. And I want to suggest this. I was talking to somebody just a week ago about this, that if you have values and you're not doing this, there's actually danger in creating cynicism and mistrust in your workplace. It's better to have no values, I think, than to have values that you pretend to live up to, and everyone knows you're not living up to those. And it just creates these eye-rolling moments and these memes that employees secretly share because they know you're not living up to these values. So don't bother having them unless you are seriously going to back them up with your actions.
And Michael, I recall again with an organization, we went through this values exercise, and naturally one of the values was apparently people. Apparently. And I thought, no, it's not people, because and I thought the whole exercise was silly, because I thought, if you want to know your values, look how you make decisions. What's determining your decisions? And it's not people. Wasn't one of them. It wasn't valuing people.
Yeah, well, that's a really good point, George. I talk about this kind of values test that you can do, that you should be able to, especially as a leader. If you hire a new employee, say, as an example, you should be able to go to that employee after 6 months without telling them what your values are, and then ask them, so what do you think my values are? What do you think the values of our team, of our organization are based on your first 6 months here? Because they're going to see your values. They're either going to see them or not. They're going to see them lived out loud. And that's how we know what your real values are, where you're investing your time, your energy, your words, your commitments.
Is culture fluid?
Yeah, I think it's fluid. I think it's reacting to things that are happening in the world. There's quite a bit right now that's happening in the world. So I think it has to be fluid. It has to be evolving. It has to grow. In fact, I love this idea that some companies are very conscious of. Many of you have probably heard the phrase hiring for culture fit, right? We want to make sure we're hiring employees that are a good culture fit for us. Well, some organizations remind themselves, there's a danger in that. If we hire just for culture fit, the danger is we might be hiring clones of ourselves. So we're not bringing in people who have new perspectives, new ideas that are going to push us in new directions. So what some organizations live by when it comes to hiring is this idea of hiring for culture growth. We want to hire people that are going to build our culture, move our culture in the direction we want to take it. So there's that aspect of fluidity that I love. Now, at the same time, I would counter that notion of fluidity with the idea that there are some anchors that you need in your culture that should not change. Certain values, certain things that you wanted to hold strong and firm, especially during periods of intense change, rapid change, that you can look to as your guiding lights, your guiding principles. These we are going to hold firm to these things because these do not change no matter how rough the seas are going to get.
Give us an example of some of those anchors that you've encountered.
Well, it could be as I said, it could certainly be values. Now, I've certainly worked with clients where their values evolve. They might come up with a couple new values. They want to shift their values. But for the most part, I think if you've got a couple of really important core values that you have always stood behind, they are part of your history, part of your tradition, your legacy, then you want to hold firm to those because they matter. They helped build your company. They help you get to where you are today. So you've got to reinforce that message all the time with your employees. No, these are our values. We are not veering from them at all. It might be your vision. It might be your sense of purpose that you stick to through thick and thin, and that you remind people and you rally people around, especially during times of change and chaos. That can be really important to remind people, no, we've got to stick to our purpose. Remember, we're starting to veer off course here because we're getting caught up in the chaos in the storm here, and we're drifting a little bit. We've got to go back to the fundamentals and remember, this is why we exist. This is our core, our overarching purpose. So let's not get caught up by shiny object syndrome and go chasing the next great thing, because it's probably not going to work for us. Let's hold fast and true to what our real purpose is.
And I know of a company in the food business, and one of their core values is that they will only use natural ingredients. There's no way they would even challenge that. Like that's who we are. So when they're building new products or entering new markets, this is one aspect that doesn't change. And that seems to be paramount. And so is there typically a prioritization of the values? We this one always comes before this. We might change this, but never this one.
Right. I love that question, George. Sometimes in my workshops, I'll have them do an exercise. Participants do an exercise where they have to rank their values by priority. And the real reason I do this exercise isn't necessarily to get everyone to agree on how they would rank them, but simply by doing that exercise, by asking that question, that challenge, it creates a conversation around their values that they typically have never had. So they get talking about, well, what does this value actually really mean? And is that important than this other one? But there are times for sure where values are competing against one another, where you have to choose one over the other. So I think it is worth thinking about, okay, what is your most important value? And I love the phrase umbrella value, which some organizations do embrace. So it is just that idea, George, that we have this one overarching value is our umbrella value, and everything else falls below that. But that is the number one thing we have to focus on. So I'll give you an example. O'Neill, who took over, I'm trying to remember his first name, the CEO of Alcoa, huge company in the States, had huge safety issues when he took over. Paul O'Neill, that's his name. See, George, it comes eventually at my age. It might just take a little longer, but it comes. So he takes over as CEO. His opening press conference, all he talks about is safety. That's it. To the point that a reporter, I think it was a Washington Post reporter, referred to him as a hippie for talking about safety, because he didn't talk about the usual CEO stuff of shareholder value and blah, blah, blah. And all he talked about everywhere he went was safety. And he actually said, if you want to know how Alcoa is doing, look at our safety numbers. Everybody deserves to go home safe at the end of the day. And he had this belief that was shown to be true through the numbers, incredible success story, that safety was going to be their number one priority value, their umbrella value. And if we focus on safety, all these other values will improve as well. Because if we're going to focus relentlessly on safety, then people will have to collaborate more and work better as teams. Communication will improve because we'll have to communicate more effectively to talk about some of these things. Efficiency will improve because we're going to have to replace outdated equipment that are hurting our employees. So everything else would improve if we focus on this umbrella value of safety.
And I can see how so many activities would be influenced by the concept of safety. I can see it. Right down to, we're not going to provide inferior materials or inferior products, and we're going to make sure people are trained.
Right.
And we want people to be mentally aware. And so therefore we have all these aspects to think about that actually makes a stronger organization.
Yeah, totally. And now, in your company, it might not be safety. It might be something else. But it is a good idea, I think, to think about, okay, what is our umbrella prioritized value? It reminds me, too, George, of an example I talk about in a few of my books, actually, of this company in California where they came up with just one overarching value. And they actually came up with this after the president of the company had lunch with the senior executives. And just on a whim, he offered to buy lunch to anyone who could name their values, their cultural values. And nobody could. And this is the senior leadership team, right? So they're laughing, going, why do we even have these suckers, right? Like, what a joke. So they decide, okay, let's wipe the board clean and let's just have one overarching value. And so their umbrella value, and I love it, because I based a book title on it that you mentioned in my introduction, George. They decided to be the world's first 100% jerk-free workplace, which I love. And then same kind of idea. They think that if we really focus on that, all sorts of other things will improve. People will have to communicate more effectively, more constructively. Otherwise, you're going to come across as a jerk, right? You'd have to work as a teammate better. Otherwise, you're going to be a jerk. You're going to provide great service. Otherwise, you're a jerk. So it's a nice umbrella and fun value, right?
Mike, you're a proponent of humor and fun. I can't count how many times you've said those words already, but is that a critical part to culture?
Oh, I think it is. I think it's one of the most important ingredients in a healthy culture. It's one of the most undervalued, underappreciated components of a culture. I think we know from so much research that it helps build a strong culture, that it helps people just feel like they can be themselves when they come into work. And we know that is a key driver of healthy cultures. It helps create psychological safety in the workplace and belonging so that people feel free to speak up and offer outrageous ideas or ask challenging questions in meetings or just outrageous ideas, which I think I already said. But you know what I mean? It just creates it's a safer kind of environment when we have levity in it, where we're allowed to be ourselves. We know from research it builds trust. It helps us collaborate more and communicate more effectively. So it really is, I think, one of the key ingredients. And the way I look at it too, right, is I remind people of this. Hey, what would you rather have? The same level of success in your organization and less fun, or at least the same level of success and a little bit more fun? I mean, it seems like a no-brainer answer to me, right? Why wouldn't we have more fun when work has such an impact on our lives and it consumes so much of our time and energy? Let's enjoy the journey and bring a little fun. We do, it doesn't mean we're taking our jobs lightly or our customers lightly, but let's remember to take ourselves a little less seriously so that we can do our jobs more effectively.
And Mike, I know it was a TV show, but when you talk about working in a serious environment and having fun, so I'm reminded of MASH.
Oh, yeah.
Where, here they are, surgeons in a surgical, and yes, it's a TV show and
sure,
it's not real. But however, they're in this serious environment, a war zone, and they're operating, people's lives are in their hands. And in that case, I believe the message was that they needed the fun to deal with the seriousness of the situation.
Totally. And I've interviewed emergency room doctors, nurses, people working in the funeral industry. And time again, they say that very thing. We have to have a healthy sense of humor. Otherwise, we wouldn't last in this job. We really are dealing with life and death situations. And if we can't find our sense of humor, then we're lost. And we'll lose our professionalism if we don't. I've heard that message from so many people. Now, the humor that they share might not always be sharing with, the grieving families or patients in the hospital. It might even be black humor, gallows humor behind the scenes. But they need that release. They need that to retain their humanity and to be able to keep doing their jobs. It is absolutely critical.
Michael, if someone is listening right now and thinking about their own workplace, how can they do a quick check to see if this is a healthy culture and one that they want to stay involved in?
The very first thing I would say is right now, just ask your gut, because I guarantee you 99% of people can answer that question without doing anything. You don't have to go back and do a survey, do a big formal engagement. You kind of know. You ask yourself right now, are you working in a positive, healthy workplace? Would you, and here's some of the litmus tests, the questions that I would challenge you with. For example, would you recommend your workplace to one of your best friends or a family member as a great place to work? If the answer is yes, then you've probably got a pretty darn good healthy. If you're going, I don't know, that's probably a red flag. If you wrote as a frontline employee even, if you wrote your next help wanted ad, your next job posting ad, and talked about your culture in a totally honest way, what would you write? What would you say about your culture? So those are good gut check questions, I think, to ask yourselves. Do you live up? Do you think your company is living up to the hype that your company says it's all about? If you go to the About Us section on your website and read that, which you probably, if you've worked in your place for a long time, you haven't probably been there in years. So cruise by there, have a look at it, and just kind of assess, okay, is this the same place I am working right now? Are we living up to these values, this mission, this vision, this sense of purpose, these ideals? I mean, it says here, this is like an episode of Glee every day where people are singing and dancing. Well, I'm not really experiencing that. So I think asking yourself just a few of those questions can be really, really healthy. And then, have this conversation back with your teammates, with your boss. Suggest that, hey, maybe, and it doesn't have to be all formal, it doesn't have to be all serious, but just, suggest, hey, you know what, maybe we need to just take, even if it's just a couple hours to start, and just have a meeting specifically to just have a casual conversation about where you're at with your culture. Just kind of check in with your teammates. One of the examples that I love that I talk about in my book is from a U.S. military ship in the Navy, the USS Benfold. And one of the ways that a new commanding officer turned this horrible culture around, it was horrible at one point, is by asking crew members 3 simple questions. So we don't have to overcomplicate this. And the 3 questions are simply this. What is one thing, the number one thing you like about working on this ship? What is the number one thing you don't like? And what is just one thing you would change? Now, these aren't big, right? You don't have to bring in a high-priced consultant and spend a year talking about this. These are simple questions you could ask on a regular basis. You could ask right now with your team and start to get some good data. But here's the key, as they did on the USS Benfold, you actually have to listen to the ideas. You have to listen to the comments and actually implement what you are hearing as much as possible. And that is what largely turned that ship around.
Those are powerful questions, Michael. Simple and powerful. One thing that you like about this organization, one thing that you don't like, and one thing that you would change if you could change. Wow.
Yeah.
Those are...
And simple works, right? Simple always works for me.
And I'm wondering, and I'm thinking about an individual candidate applying to work for an organization. Perhaps one of the questions they might ask the hiring manager, if they feel so bold, is tell me about your culture. And
totally.
Now, however, what if people answer with the stock answer that's on the poster on the wall? How does a person challenge that without being antagonistic?
Yeah, I think you could ask some follow-up questions just to try and get into specifics. I think if you have a couple of good examples that you could use, maybe things you experienced in a former job that didn't sit well with you, and just be like, you're going to be living with these folks a long time. It's a huge decision. So don't be shy about asking these questions. We had this issue in my last job, and boy, it didn't sit well with the employees. So I'm wondering how your workplace would deal with this kind of issue. Now, flipping your question around, George, too, this is one thing I urge organizations to do. In fact, I have a very small book is a really quick read called Hire, Inspire, and Fuel Their Fire, how to recruit, onboard, and train new employees to live your culture out loud. And I stress the importance when you are doing interviews to talk about your culture, to make sure it's a conversation. And I remind employers that if you truly are hiring the best possible person for that job, then that person, in theory, can go work anywhere they darn well please if they're the best possible person. And of course, you want to hire the best possible person for that job. So it's as much about selling yourselves as it is about listening to the candidates sell them to you. It's got to be a two-way street. And you want to do that anyways because you want to make sure it's a match. The last thing you want to do is hire somebody who's not a fit for your culture.
So your culture becomes part of attracting good employees. It's much more than simply salary and benefits.
Totally. And we see this all the time that you look at a company like Zappos, the online shoe-based business in Las Vegas. They're known for having a great culture. So when they have job openings, it's insane how many applications they get because they've earned this reputation as a phenomenal place to work. So when you build a great culture like that, you no longer have to go hunting, especially during periods where it's really hard to find employees, right? You become the hunted. But what you have to do, and I say this all the time, you can't be the world's best kept secret. So building a great culture is something you obviously have to do, but then you've got to promote it. You've got to champion. You've got to tell the world about it on social media, on your website. Bring it to life. Make it conversational. Make it fun. Have fun videos, fun employee testimonial videos, a top 12 and a half reasons to come work with us, and make sure some of those are just fun and wacky, but bring it to life. Tell us what it's really like to work there, not the usual jargon-laden, blah, blah. We offer a competitive benefits pack, right? Like, you're giving people the blahs with all that blah, blah, blah. So bring it to life. I mean, even organizations like I use this example sometimes of the Swedish military did this hilarious recruitment video, like a military organization, but it's this really fun, over-the-top video. And of course, they got a record response of recruits from this video. They won awards for this video because it was so different. It was so creative. So don't be afraid to use a little humor to attract people as well.
Michael, your latest book, Small Moments, Big Outcomes. And the cover, it's upside down there.
Is it upside? I knew that. I was testing you, George.
That's simply a small moment there. Now we can see it. Good. Thank you. So that suggests that small steps lead to big results. Is that fair?
Yeah, for sure. I use the title for two different meanings. I use the title. One is just this idea that life is just made up of small moments, right? It's just moment after moment. So that's all we've got, right? I remind people at the start of the book that we have in Canada, say in North America, we have on average of about 4,000 weeks given to us in this short journey called life. And when you put it into weeks, George, right, it doesn't sound like a lot because weeks go by really, really fast. Like this week is going to whip by and then all of a sudden it's going to be summer and then all of a sudden it's Halloween and then you're planning your funeral. Like it's going by really, really fast, right? So all we've got are these moments. So let's make sure we embrace the idea that the moments matter, but also, yes, it is the small things. And when I do employee surveys, I see this time and time again. It is the small things that piss off our employees, that frustrate our customers, and it is the small things that make a difference. Small little gesture. And I'm talking about the really small stuff, like you're walking down the hallway at work. Are you taking the time to just smile at somebody and wave at them and say good morning and just look like you're happy to be there? Those are the small moments that matter. I was talking to somebody works in a bank in Europe, and they talked about how they have this, and it just kind of grew organically, but they have this kind of ritual where every morning, every single employee goes around and says good morning to the other employee in this branch. I think there's about 40 employees. Now, they don't talk about the game last night and the weather because there goes half the day, right? It's just a quick check-in, but everybody does it with everyone. It's a small moment. And yet everybody talks about the impact that has on people's mood, on their morale, on the start of the day, how it just feels like you're making this connection and it strengthens that sense of belonging. So those little small moments matter, especially if you're a leader. Those small moments matter so much. So make them count.
And you can find the link to Michael's website in the description below. That's MikeKerr.com, and where you can also learn more about his book. Michael, as we prepare to wrap up, if you could sit with a business leader, team leader, and offer them 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice on how they can check their workplace culture, their company culture, the team culture on a regular basis, what 1, 2, or 3 questions might they pose to themselves?
Might they pose to themselves? Questions they might pose to themselves? Well, one is just starting with that question about intentionality, because everything starts there. So I would just ask the question to yourself, how intentional am I as a leader when it comes to our culture? And I'll often ask people that. I'll ask it in workshops. And most people, the vast majority of people will admit, they're not doing a very good job at that. they don't tend to put culture as front and center as they should. And so if you don't shift that thinking, nothing's going to happen. So that's the first question I would just ask is, how intentional am I being as a leader when it comes to culture? And the second question I would ask is this: what legacy do I want to leave behind as a leader? And when I say leave behind, I don't necessarily want you to think about, when you retire or, God forbid, get run over by a bus. But I mean, the legacy you want to build day in and day out, the legacy that you're creating right now. Whether you know it or not, or like it or not, people are talking about you when you leave the room if you're the leader. So what legacy, what wake do you want to leave behind you day in and day out as a leader? I think those two questions for me are really powerful questions if we think about them and if we actually apply them.
Powerful questions.
You got choked up there. That's so powerful.
You bet. Yeah. Powerful advice from Michael Kerr. My guest today is Michael Kerr, reminding you that positive culture is a competitive advantage. If you like what you heard, tell your friends and post your 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, because that helps more listeners find us. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.